I'm joined now by Texas State Representative James Talarico. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So we know that there is this special legislative session that was called by Greg Abbott in Texas to basically to gerrymander the state's maps even further. Gavin Newsom out here where I am in California has responded and basically said, if Texas goes ahead with this, then we're going to seek to retaliate here in our state. And so now this is going to basically spark off a new cycle where the maps are going to be gerrymandered even further in multiple states across the country. First and foremost, can I have your reaction to the fact that this might happen now in California to counteract what Greg Abbott is doing in Texas, and to ask if that's having any impact on what the Texas Republicans are thinking?
Well, I'm here at the state capitol this weekend preparing for this special session that starts on Monday. And we should be coming together at the state capitol to talk about flood relief for the victims in the Hill Country and across central Texas. We should be talking about how to prevent catastrophes like that from ever happening again. But instead of focusing on the real problems, Greg Abbott is doing Trump's bidding by redrawing the Texas political maps and, taking our districts into crazy shapes to guarantee the outcome they want. I mean, the president is attempting to rig the next election. And so I'm thankful that Texas Democrats, my colleagues here in the state legislature, are having conversations about how we can stop this, how we can stand up to Greg Abbott and Donald Trump. But I'm also thankful that folks in other states are also having those conversations. I mean, we as Democrats can't allow this type of power grab to go forward.
Right.
We have to stand up. We have to match energy. And so I'm thankful that folks in California are promising to retaliate if Greg Abbott and Donald Trump decide to move forward with this.
In terms of the tools that you have, the Texas Democrats have at your disposal, from the minority, minority parties are generally rendered pretty weak against the majority party. Is there anything that you would be able to do? Are there any tools at your disposal that you think would actually be effective at blocking what they're looking to do?
I do. In the minority here in Texas, we have to use every tool in our toolbox. That's everything from the rules, using the rules to the best of our ability, using our platforms to raise awareness and organize people. And then, of course, they still need all of us to make quorum and be able to conduct business. And so there's a whole range of options at our disposal for how to confront this. And I think my colleagues and I are trying to figure out what that looks like. And, honestly, we haven't even gavelled in. We haven't even seen what the maps would look like. I think we want to go through some of these steps before we decide what tool to use. But regardless of our strategy, I hope that everyone, whether you're a Democrat or an independent or a Republican, realizes the danger of politicians silencing our voices and attempting to steal the next election. I mean, Brian, you've done some great coverage on the big, beautiful bill, but I mean, this was the largest transfer of wealth in American history, kicking millions of people off their health care to fund tax cuts for billionaires. They know that's unpopular, but they think they can insulate themselves from the voters with this type of power grab. And if they succeed here in Texas, they're going to do it in red states across the country. They're going to rig the 2026 election. And if that happens, they'll never have to fear the voters ever again.
Right.
They can enrich themselves and their donors with no consequences, with no accountability. And that really is going to the heart of our democracy. And I hope that's an alarm bell for all Americans and all Texans.
James, are there any of your Republican colleagues who recognize that? Are there any Republican colleagues who have enough of a basic respect for democracy that they're turned off by what's happening? Or is this just, kind of the next step in the full polarization of our politics, that when Donald Trump hands down the, issues the clarion call from up high, that Greg Abbott calls in the special legislative session, and every single Republican legislator just kind of walks the plank?
Well, I think there are certainly a number of my colleagues who recognize that this is wrong, that it's dangerous. The question is, are they going to stand up and say so? Are they going to do something about it? I still have hope that people on the other side of the aisle can have a moment of courage here and do the right thing. I'm not ready to give up on that possibility, but we as Democrats should be prepared for a scenario where they don't stand up, and that means that we've got to fight back. So we can't wait on Republican courage. We can hope for it, we can pray for it, but we certainly can't wait for it. And so I'm hopeful that Democrats, both here in Texas and honestly across the country, are going to react to this and meet the moment and stand up to this power grab.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the Speaker of the Texas State House get elected with the help of Democrats? Is that correct?
That's correct.
So isn't there some leverage that Democrats have here in terms of helping this Republican stay atop his position? Is there some basic agreement or understanding that was struck between the Democrats and the Speaker to be able, to determine the extent of the abuse or the limits to the abuses of his power that he'll usher in?
Well, I think that all remains to be seen. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of us saw this coming. Maybe we should have, but I honestly didn't anticipate a mid-decade gerrymandering attempt. I didn't have that on my bingo card, unfortunately. But as you mentioned, here in the Texas House, we still have some shreds of bipartisanship, and Democrats are a very large minority. A lot of people have this conception of Texas as this, deep red state, when actually it's a lot more purple than it is red. And Democrats control about 42% of the seats in the Texas House of Representatives. So we're a substantial minority, and with those numbers, you can cause a lot of chaos. And I would prefer not to do that. I would hope that our Republican colleagues, I would hope the Speaker would work with us to prevent this power grab from moving forward. And we should say, Brian, that if they're going to do this in Texas, because we are increasingly a purple state, by getting greedy, they may draw these districts so thin that we could end up flipping a lot of these districts if 2026 is a good year. So I do know that some of my Republican colleagues recognize that political danger, that by getting greedy, they actually may be handing Democrats an opportunity to win. It doesn't mean this power grab is acceptable. It's incredibly dangerous. It's an incredibly bad precedent to set, and we should stop it. But there may be some unintended consequences if they move forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not just the unintended consequences within Texas, but we spoke about California looking to gerrymander this state that I'm in right now. There are other states that Democrats have that could potentially be weapons on the left. We have New York, we have New Jersey, and so the greed of Donald Trump and Greg Abbott in this scenario may very well usher in a situation where not only would those lines be drawn so thin that Democrats themselves would flip them in a good year, which 2026, at least the polling would suggest, may very well turn out to be, but it could end up leading to a situation where maps in California, in New York, in New Jersey, and other states across the country also go much more blue by virtue of these gerrymanders that were done in a retaliatory fashion.
And I just want us to pause and recognize that this is not how the system should work.
Right.
Voters should be picking their politicians, not the other way around. And right now, politicians are attempting to pick their voters by crafting the districts they want to guarantee the outcome they want. And that's just a fundamental disruption to the democratic process. And it insulates politicians in both political parties from accountability, from consequences for their actions. And that again is incredibly harmful to this American experiment. So although we need to match energy and we need to fight back and we need to stand up to these bullies, we should all recognize that this is not how things should work. This broken redistricting system is the rot at the core of our broken political system. And it's why I filed a bill in the last two legislative sessions to create a independent citizen-led redistricting commission in Texas so that we can take the power to draw political districts out of the hands of politicians and put it into the hands of the Texans we seek to represent. So that should be the ultimate goal. We can't unilaterally disarm, unfortunately, but that should be what we're working toward in the long term.
And actually, the unilateral disarmament part is kind of what I want to dig into for just a moment.
Yeah.
I believe there is a California Assembly member named Alex Lee. He's a member of the Progressive Caucus. Came out in defiance of Gavin Newsom's proposal to usher in our own special session so that we would be able to do mid-decade redistricting here as well. And he was against it and basically suggested that if we do this, this will just descend politics into a worse state than we were in before. And I push back against this online, suggesting that this isn't, this isn't us kicking off a cycle of gerrymandering, because we're in it. And Republicans have gerrymandered Ohio and North Carolina and West Virginia and Utah and Florida, and looking to do the same thing in Texas right now. They've done it in Wisconsin. So there are so many states across the country where this has happened, and yet I feel like there's this mentality among Democrats that like we have to, so long as we sit atop our moral mountain, even if we're thrusting ourselves into political obscurity, that somehow derives some benefit for us, that we're gonna, I don't know, maybe confer that if we act in a certain way, that it will be reciprocated by a Republican Party that has thus far shown no desire to reciprocate, that if we confer goodwill onto them, that they'll reciprocate that goodwill, even though they've not done it. And so I'm just curious for your reaction, because, look, you're a progressive Democrat as well, and I get the moral stance that somebody could take against this issue, but practically speaking, I'm just curious how you would respond to legislators here in my state who would be against this.
Well, this is a balance we have to strike. Dr. King in the civil rights movement told his movement to have a tough mind and a tender heart, and to hold both of those things together. And for me, having a tender heart means knowing why we're doing this, having that moral clarity, knowing what the vision is ultimately that we're trying to get to, and not getting lost in the back and forth that we're seeing today. But then having a tough mind means, being smart and strategic, and realizing when our politics is already descending in this direction. Right. We have to stand up to those folks who are destroying this American experiment. So we have to do both. We have to remember why we're doing this. We have to remember what we're ultimately trying to get to. We're not just trying to win for the blue team. That is not our goal. Our goal is to get political power to make people's lives better. That's the ultimate goal.
Right.
But to do that, you've got to be smart and strategic and tough. You can't lay down. You can't. We've seen that appeasement doesn't work, especially when you're facing fascism. So you have to be tough. You have to be strong, but also protect that moral clarity, that moral compass at the center of our work. That's not easy to do, but we do have to hold both together if we're going to get through this.
Literally could not have said that better. That is exactly right. And I think that has been a problem for Democrats for so long, that once we get into power, it feels like we lose our way and begin defending the processes of government, as opposed to remembering why we're there. It is not to defend the filibuster. It's not to defend the status quo. It's not to defend the maps or to defend a system with least change. It's to help people have health care, and for women to have reproductive rights, and for us to combat climate change and make sure that kids aren't getting gunned down in schools. And so often, far from protecting the institutions of government, those are the impediments. So break those down if it means that you can get closer to what you want to do. But, look, people get into government and you think that, like, I'm here to defend good government. And look, my whole thing in the lead up to the 2024 election, perhaps naively, and certainly not strategically in retrospect, was to appeal to people's sense of wanting to protect democracy. But really, it's not just this nebulous idea of democracy or our institutions that are moving people. It's the things. It's going after, again, healthcare and reproductive rights and climate change and unions and jobs and the pay that they take home at the end of the day, and making sure prescription drugs are affordable. All the things that you actually run for, the things that impact real people. And we have to remember to, not lose sight of that, especially with folks who, get stuck in these political processes and are surrounded by all of it, and just kind of, I don't know if it's like beltway brain or whatever you would call that at the state level, but that seems to be what it is.
Yeah, too many Democrats are defending the status quo. And I understand the desire, especially in this Trump era, to protect our institutions and our norms. I get all that. But the reason that I'm a progressive, the reason I'm a Democrat, is because I want to change things. These systems, these institutions don't work for a lot of people. And if we're not out there articulating a vision of how they should be different, how they should be better, then we end up just defending the status quo. And I'm not interested in doing that because the status quo doesn't work. And you know, Brian, that I was a public school teacher before I ran for office, and
Yeah.
it's the issue I'm most passionate about. And sometimes people in my party end up defending public education as is, but I'm not satisfied with the way our public schools are performing. I'm not going to be satisfied until our Texas public schools are the best in the country. I'm not going to be satisfied until every single child has the ability to fulfill their God-given potential. That doesn't mean I want to privatize public education or tear it all down, but I do want to improve it. I want to change it. I want to make it better and make it work for people. So we just we can't fall into the trap of defending broken institutions, broken systems, or defending the status quo. We got to be the party of change, which is our historical heritage.
Right. James, you were on Joe Rogan's show this past week, and that obviously is a space that Democrats have there was a lot of coverage, a lot of focus on the fact that Democrats haven't gone into those spaces, haven't been on the same podcast that these Republicans went on, haven't been able to reach the breadth of audience that these Republicans were able to reach by virtue of going on these shows. So first and foremost, I'm curious, and I listened to your whole episode, and it was great, and not only was it a great conversation, but it seems like Joe Rogan himself. I mean, you got a ringing endorsement from Rogan, and I wrote it down. He said, "You're the kind of person I want in politics." And so I feel like, there has been this sense of fear among Democrats to go into these spaces because they're somehow hostile or dangerous. But I'm curious, in the aftermath of your interview with him, did you have that mentality going in? And what is your mentality now about going into these spaces?
I think it's absolutely necessary that Democrats meet people where they're at. Before I went on Joe Rogan's podcast, I went on Fox News, and I've been on the Christian Broadcasting Network, been on the 700 Club. I'm trying to go into places where Democrats don't typically go, because politics is about addition, not subtraction.
Yep.
So if you want to maintain a small, pure, insular group, then you don't want a political party. You want a social club. And that's fine. But if you want a political party that can win and gain political power to make people's lives better, you have to create a winning majority, a winning coalition. And that should include a lot of Joe Rogan's listeners. I mean, I sat down with Joe for 2.5 hours, and there was so much common ground, so much that we agreed on. We both agreed that the political system is broken. We both agree there's way too much influence from big money and billionaire mega donors. We both think that there should be more freedom and more opportunity for more people. I mean, that is a lot of common ground. I'm not saying we agree on every single thing, but I do think we agree on the big stuff. And so if Democrats aren't going on to these shows and speaking to these listeners directly, then we run the risk of folks not hearing about our values and hearing about our vision. And that's a real danger, as we saw in the last election. So, I'm going to keep going into these places. I'm going to keep sharing why I do this work and why I'm a Democrat and why I think we need change in this country. And hopefully we will see the fruits of that in 2026.
Did you hear from anybody in the aftermath of your appearance that maybe somebody who is in the center or on the right, or just somebody who didn't vote for you, somebody who doesn't vote for Democrats, who is more willing to be open to Democrats, or who just straight up said, this has changed my perspective on politics altogether?
I can't tell you, Brian, just in the last minute, this episode came out not even 24 hours ago, and I've already been inundated both on social media, but also here in our Capitol office with calls and emails and messages from Republicans and independents who listened to the episode and said that they found a lot they could agree with, and we're very thankful that they heard from this different perspective. It's a little strange to have folks on Twitter with MAGA stuff in their profile picture saying nice things about you, but I do just fundamentally believe that our politics is not really left versus right, but top versus bottom. I just think that we are all getting played here by these billionaires and special interests that are dividing us on purpose. I mean, the culture wars in a lot of ways, are a smokescreen. These divisions are manufactured. They divide us by race, by culture, by gender, by religion. to keep us from seeing all that we have in common, to keep us from realizing that there is far more that unites us than divides us. Because once we do realize that, then we're going to come together across party lines, across racial lines, across cultural lines to take power back from the billionaires who are pitting us against each other. And that's the real threat to the people in power.
You know, the one small irony, and I know that you just push back against the culture wars, and you're right to do that. The irony of the Epstein stuff is that a lot of Trump's base decided to vote him in, his own warts notwithstanding, because they believe that he would be the person to expose the systemic corruption that would allow somebody like Jeffrey Epstein and all of his clients, who you know are thus far unnamed, to get away with heinous crimes. And yes, it's his heinous crimes, but also it's what he represented. It's an entire echelon of people who are unaccountable, who are bound by a different system of justice, a different tier of justice. And so they wanted him to come in because they thought he would be the person to expose that systemic corruption, to break it down. And the irony now is that, in fact, he's the one entrenching it by of course, refusing to release the Epstein files. But when you talk about like this top versus bottom, it's not left versus right, it's top versus bottom. That is the ultimate irony in what we're seeing very much be the I don't want to say downfall, because you know I think that would just be too convenient, but a major splintering of Trump's own base is that that's what he ran on, and yet now he's entrenching the very system that he promised to break down.
Well, and you can't blame him, because I mean that's what Donald Trump and JD Vance and all these people told these folks that,
of course, yeah,
you know, that's what they were going to do. And so, you know, I know that the appeal of Donald Trump is that he's not a typical politician. I get that. You know, I do find it, even as a Democrat, I find some of the ways that Donald Trump speaks, you know, to be a little refreshing, because he doesn't sound like the typical poll-tested, consultant-driven politician. And so I get why that was appealing. But now that he's in office, you see that, you know, he's cutting taxes for himself and his rich friends. He's
Right.
kicking his own voters off their health care and off food assistance. And he's not even releasing, you know, the Epstein files that could shed some light on this issue. And so I think that ultimately actions speak louder than words. And I hope that people are realizing that Donald Trump is a con man, always has been, always will be. He says the right things. He pushes the right buttons, but ultimately, when it comes down to it, he's going to protect himself and his you know, his powerful friends. And I hope that's a realization for folks. But we as Democrats have to provide an alternative. And what we're providing right now, what we're offering to voters, is not going to cut it. So our party has to have some deep introspection about what went wrong, how we need to be different, how we need to get back to our roots of fighting for regular people, and only when that happens are we going to be able to turn this country into a better and more healthy direction.
Perfectly put, as always, James. I'm grateful for the work you're doing, reaching other audiences, getting out of the usual liberal bubble in our bifurcated media ecosystem. So grateful for the work you're doing to reach other people right now, and as always, for your voice. James Talarico, appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.